On April 16, 1988, just before dawn broke over Tunis, one of the most infamous covert operations in modern history came to a silent and explosive end. In less than 2 minutes, elite Israeli commandos stormed a villa and assassinated Khalil al-Wazir, better known as Abu Jihad. He wasn't just any target. He was the co-founder of Fatah, a close ally of Yasser Arafat, and the chief strategist of the Palestinian resistance. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment kill. It was a mission meticulously engineered down to.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
To the last detail. And it wasn't just about killing a man, it was about sending a message. Abu Jihad had long been in Israel's crosshairs. His fingerprints were all over key attacks during the 1970s, including the 1978 Coastal Road Massacre, one of the deadliest in Israeli history. As the First Intifada intensified, he was accused of directing operations remotely from Tunisia. He wasn't just symbolic, he was operational, a living nerve center of Palestinian resistance. For Israel, eliminating Abu Jihad was framed as a necessary act of national defense, but how they went about it pushed the boundaries of international conduct. This wasn't a battlefield assassination. This was an extraterritorial execution carried out in the capital of a sovereign country without consent, without warning, and without accountability. The lead-up to the operation read like a blueprint for modern special ops. Israeli intelligence agencies spent months gathering data. Informants inside the PLO helped map Abu Jihad's daily routines. Surveillance teams identified guard patterns, lights-on times, and phone calls. A full-scale replica of his villa was constructed so that the assault team could rehearse every corner, every step, every door. Naval forces transported the unit via missile boats under radio silence. They landed covertly on Tunisian shores and moved through the city undetected. When the time came, they struck with surgical precision, suppressed weapons, rapid entry, guards neutralized. Abu Jihad was shot dead before he had time to fight back. The entire operation from breach to exit took about 90 seconds. The commandos vanished. No casualties on their side, no traceable evidence left behind, just one body and a political firestorm. Palestinians mourned not just a leader but a symbol. Tens of thousands flooded the streets. For them, Abu Jihad was more than a strategist. He was a living reminder of the ongoing struggle. His death turned him into something larger, an icon, a martyr, a rallying point. Israel never officially confirmed the mission. Strategic ambiguity has long been part of its doctrine, but everyone knew the silence was deliberate. It was meant to protect diplomatic channels while delivering a clear message: no one was beyond reach. But while the operation succeeded in its immediate goal, the broader consequences were anything but simple. The assassination triggered massive protests not just in Palestinian territories but across the Arab world. It didn't stop the First Intifada, it didn't dismantle Fatah, and it certainly didn't weaken Palestinian morale. In fact, it did the opposite. It pushed moderates to the sidelines. It reinforced the belief that negotiation with Israel was futile, and it elevated more radical voices within the movement. Inside Israel, the mission was praised as a demonstration of elite capability and national resolve. Within Palestinian communities, it was proof of systemic targeting, not just of fighters but of political leadership. The conflict lines hardened. Internationally, the response was swift. Tunisia, humiliated by the violation of its sovereignty, severed diplomatic ties with Israel. The UN Security Council condemned the raid. Human rights groups called it a breach of international law. For critics, it wasn't just about the killing of one man, it was about setting a precedent. If one country could conduct lethal operations in another with no declaration of war, no extradition process, and no legal justification, what was left of the international system? Supporters of the operation argued that it prevented future attacks, protected civilians, and eliminated a dangerous adversary. Critics warned that it normalized extrajudicial killings, destabilized diplomatic norms, and risked endless cycles of retaliation. Both were right in their own ways, because the impact of Abu Jihad's death went far beyond the confines of that villa in Tunis. It shifted the calculus. Not just for Israel, but for every government watching. The operation became a model, studied, replicated, refined. Military planners began to understand the value of intelligence-driven, high-precision strikes in hostile or politically sensitive environments. Years later, the methods used in the Abu Jihad raid would echo in U.S. operations, including the killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011. This was more than an assassination, it was a preview of where global warfare was headed. The intelligence, the mock rehearsals, the layered logistics, this was next-level coordination, and it wasn't just impressive from a military standpoint, it was effective, it worked, but that success came with a price. Because removing Abu Jihad didn't break the movement, it fractured it, and in that fragmentation, radical elements took hold. Instead of calming the storm, the operation intensified it. Moderates lost ground, hardliners gained traction, resistance hardened. The fight didn't end, it evolved. Even decades later, the legacy of that night remains a fault line in the region. Abu Jihad's face is still painted on walls, his name still chanted at protests, his writings still quoted in speeches. The man who once coordinated operations from exile became, in death, a permanent fixture of the Palestinian narrative. His killing turned him from a planner into a symbol, from a commander into a cause. For Israel, the operation stands as proof of its intelligence reach and military prowess, but it also sparked decades of scrutiny over its tactics. It raised lasting questions about sovereignty, international law, and the ethics of unilateral force. It forced the world to confront the blurry space where counterterrorism and assassination meet. What makes this story so enduring is that it's not just about what happened, it's about what it meant. It's about how military success can produce political confusion, how eliminating a threat can also ignite a movement, and how, in trying to silence a voice, you sometimes amplify it. The assassination of Abu Jihad remains one of the boldest acts of Israeli counterterrorism. It was meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, and globally consequential. But it didn't stop the uprising. It didn't end the conflict. It added a new chapter, one still being written today. If this story made you rethink what success in warfare really looks like the video, share it with someone who thinks a quick mission ends with clean results, and tell us what you think in the comments. Was this the turning point where targeted killing became normalized, or just another example of short-term wins with long-term fallout? And make sure you subscribe, because the deeper you dig into these operations, the more you realize some of the biggest battles aren't fought on the front lines, they're fought in the shadows. Let's go deeper into the legacy of this operation, because what happened in that villa in Tunis didn't end with Abu Jihad's death. In fact, the story didn't even peak there. That was just the ignition point. What followed was a cascading series of events that reshaped not only Palestinian politics, but the entire way the world views counterterrorism, sovereignty, and extrajudicial power. This was the moment when military doctrine, political ideology, and moral uncertainty collided, and no one walked away untouched. Inside the Palestinian territories, the assassination was received not as a defeat, but as a confirmation. A confirmation that Israel was willing to reach into any space at any cost to take out their leadership. It validated the fears of many who had already doubted any hope for negotiation or peaceful resolution. When the body of Abu Jihad was returned and laid to rest, he wasn't buried quietly. He was buried with the kind of symbolism that fuels generations. Crowds mourned him not just as a man but as a martyr. The resistance didn't die with him, it became sharper, louder, more emboldened. And that was the unintended consequence. If the objective was to break the resistance's spine by removing its key strategist, the result was more like cutting the brakes on a car already hurtling downhill. Moderates in Fatah who had once advocated for a more diplomatic route lost leverage. Hardliners seized momentum. The space for political compromise narrowed. Within months, the tone inside the movement had changed. Abu Jihad's death didn't fracture the uprising, it intensified it. That intensity spread far beyond Palestinian communities. In Tunisia, the embarrassment was acute. This was not a country at war with Israel, this was not a battlefield. And yet Israeli forces had infiltrated its capital, executed a high-profile assassination, and escaped without so much as a scratch. It was a slap in the face to Tunisian sovereignty, and the message was clear: if you're in the way, you're irrelevant. Tunisia responded by cutting off diplomatic ties with Israel. They filed formal complaints to the United Nations. But the truth was, there wasn't much they could do. The damage was done. The world had witnessed what happened when a powerful nation prioritized tactical precision over international law. The condemnation from global bodies came fast, but it came with no consequences. That lack of repercussions wasn't lost on other nations. Governments, militaries, and intelligence agencies around the world watched and learned. They saw what Israel had pulled off, a zero-fail mission with no paper trail, no accountability, and maximum psychological effect. And whether they agreed with it or not, they understood what it meant. This was the future of warfare, covert, precise, and untethered from traditional battlefields. In that sense, the Abu Jihad operation didn't just eliminate a man. It ushered in a new era of global military thinking. The model became a template. Decades later, when U.S. forces raided Osama bin Laden's compound in Pakistan, the structure of that operation echoed Tunis. Nighttime raid, extensive intelligence gathering, mock training environments, cross-border action without permission, and strategic ambiguity until confirmation was unavoidable. The DNA of modern targeted killing operations traces back to the template set by Mossad and Israeli commandos that night in 1988. But there's a difference between tactical inspiration and strategic success. Because if you strip away the operational genius and look only at the long-term outcome, the picture is murkier. Abu Jihad's death did not weaken Fatah's infrastructure. It did not end the First Intifada. It did not bring Israel any closer to peace or security. What it did do was push the conflict further into zero-sum territory. It hardened positions, it validated fears, and it made future peace talks even more fragile. On the legal side, the operation cracked open one of the most persistent debates in international relations. Can a nation justify violating another's sovereignty in the name of preemptive self-defense? Israel's position has long been that such operations are necessary to protect its citizens and prevent attacks. And from a purely defensive perspective, it's hard to argue against removing someone who has actively planned operations that have killed civilians. But critics point out the obvious danger. Once targeted assassinations become normalized, the threshold for justification lowers. Who decides who qualifies as a legitimate target? What's the limit? And when one country gets away with it, what stops others from doing the same? Those aren't theoretical questions, they're practical ones. Because since Abu Jihad's assassination, targeted killings have become an embedded part of international security strategy. They are no longer rare exceptions, they are standard tools. But tools come with trade-offs. The legal ambiguity that allowed Israel to conduct the Abu Jihad raid also opened the door for others to stretch, bend, and eventually ignore the rules. In the years that followed, multiple states, not just in the Middle East, began to embrace the logic of precision killing. The line between military operations and political executions became blurrier. The consequences, often unintended, became more frequent. Back on the ground in Palestinian territories, the conflict evolved. The vacuum left by Abu Jihad's absence wasn't filled with new ideas or hope, it was filled with escalation. More armed factions emerged. The internal politics of the Palestinian movement splintered. The uprising became less coordinated, more volatile. And in that chaos, the chances for meaningful negotiations grew slimmer. Abu Jihad's name didn't fade, it multiplied. Schools, squares, and military brigades were named after him, his writings were reprinted, his speeches rebroadcast. In the struggle for identity, legacy, and purpose, his martyrdom gave the resistance a new foundation. The man Israel saw as a threat to eliminate became the symbol Palestine used to unify. And that's what makes this story so layered. Because when you look back at the operation, it's easy to be impressed. The planning, the execution, the timing, but when you look at what came after, you have to ask, was it worth it? That's the uncomfortable part of statecraft. Some actions make tactical sense but cause strategic damage. Some wins on the battlefield come at the cost of diplomacy, and sometimes removing one man just creates space for more conflict. The assassination of Abu Jihad was not just an event, it was a turning point. A perfect example of how military brilliance can live side by side with political confusion, how precision can mask volatility, and how a 90-second operation can echo for decades. It shaped how countries think about risk, legality, and the reach of military power. It altered the course of Palestinian politics. It inflamed a conflict that's still burning, and it helped usher in an age where covert assassinations are no longer the exception, they're a central part of modern warfare. And still, the question remains, when you operate in the shadows, who holds you accountable? When the mission is complete but the war continues, what did you really accomplish? Here's the part that rarely makes the headlines, but sticks with you long after the story ends. When the dust settled in Tunis, when the international statements were filed, when the funeral marches faded into chants, and when Mossad had already moved on to the next name on their list, the legacy of Abu Jihad's assassination was just beginning. Not in terms of tactical value, that was obvious, but in terms of what it meant, not just to Palestinians, not just to Israelis, but to the global understanding of what war looks like when borders stop meaning anything. Because this was never just about one man. This was about power, the kind of power that moves in silence, that crosses oceans undetected, that turns international law into a suggestion, not a rule, and that in one night showed the entire world how far a nation would go to eliminate a perceived threat. It's easy to get caught up in the action, the infiltration, the 90-second kill, the seamless retreat, but what lingers isn't the operation. It's the precedent, the question that hangs over every future mission like it. What happens when you prove you can do something like this and get away with it? The answer is what we're living with now. Before Abu Jihad, state-sponsored assassinations were rare and often deniable. After, they became a viable policy tool. Tactical assassination became part of the national security toolkit for not just Israel, but for global powers looking for clean solutions to complex threats. But there's nothing clean about them. Abu Jihad's assassination created a domino effect no one could fully control. Within Palestine, it elevated martyrdom as a political force. It entrenched the belief that compromise would always be met with force. It hardened the youth movements that were already boiling over. His death, intended to bring down a movement, instead energized it. Israel didn't eliminate terrorism, it didn't break the resistance, it didn't stop the intifada. What it did was perfect the mechanics of the mission. But the mechanics don't change the narrative, they don't silence the story, and in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, stories matter as much as strategy. Abu Jihad became a story, one that lives on graffiti walls, in protest songs, in political speeches, and in the institutional memory of a generation. And here's the twist: while Israel never confirmed its involvement, the silence worked in favor of the myth. Strategic ambiguity might serve diplomatic needs, but in the streets it only added to the power of the narrative. It fed into the idea that the rules don't apply, that leadership will be hunted, that sovereignty is a loose concept when geopolitics gets involved. That's what made the operation such a turning point. It wasn't the first targeted killing, it wouldn't be the last, but it was a moment when the mask came off, when a sovereign government showed the world that it would enforce its red lines anywhere at any cost, and when the rest of the world, even as it condemned the move, started quietly planning their own versions of it. That's why this story doesn't end, it echoes. If this breakdown helped you connect the tactical dots with the political aftermath, hit like, share it with someone who still believes military power lives in public battles, and drop your thoughts below. Was this a strategic masterstroke or the beginning of something much darker? And subscribe, because the next story in this shadow war is already unfolding.